First Fruits Coffee Roasting Course. It's kind of going to be a bit of a workshop, a bit of an overview of how the coffee process works. I have a popcorn popper that I've modified that I then dodgily hooked up to my extraction and my proper roaster. It works, but it's kind of dodgy. But anyway, it'll get through the night. I have already set one on fire today, but I have a bunch of spares in case that happens. But don't worry, I have a fire extinguisher down here. It should be right. It should be right. We'll go through a couple of test roasts, and you can kind of see how we would roast if we're roasting on a big one. A big one's going to take 12 to 14 minutes. This thing's crazy overpowered because it's a small thing that's meant to throw popcorn out of it. And it'll probably take about 6 or 7 minutes. But then I've also got a whole bunch of coffee that I roasted today that we can taste. We're going to cup, and we can taste the differences between the roast levels. It's all roasted on the same Colombian Supremo, and so we'll be able to taste the difference. That's going to be really gross, but it'll give you a really good understanding of what coffee is. Green coffee. It's the seed of a fruit, yeah, so it grows inside of a coffee cherry. They grow together, kind of like this, which is why one side's rounded and the other side's flat. So it kind of puffs around, unless you get something like this, which is a pea berry, which is maybe 10% of the coffee producers a pea berry, where only one grows inside of it. Depending on where it's from, sometimes they'll separate these and they sell for quite a lot more. There's a lot of flavour in them. Sometimes they're kind of a bit of a letdown. Seed of a tree, picking and processing coffee's often hand-picked, especially the good stuff. Like, you can mechanically harvest it. The problem is you've got a branch. On that branch, you've got underripe, ripe, and overripe cherries. Mechanical harvester can't check the colour and pick it off. So it's just, usually hand-picked. And then if you're at Ethiopia, it's on such a steep slope, there's no way they can get machinery up and down there. Traditionally, if we reverse 10 years, we only really had to worry about washed, honey, and natural. Now, as we can see, we have all these fermentations, which is making coffee super exciting. It also just means we have a lot more to learn, and it's a little bit more complicated. Which is cool. So natural process is generally the cherries are picked off, the seed stays inside, and it gets taken out of the cherries later. Washed is a little bit more complicated, where it gets picked and then pulped and then fermented, which means that usually if it comes straight off the tree and they pulp it, it's still got a lot of mucilage on it, kind of like a mango pip. It has, stuff all over it, and so they ferment it for a couple of days to get that off. And then they basically just flush it with water to get all of the rest of it off, and then they lay it out to dry, which is washed. Honey's a little bit different, where actually this Costa Rica, the one that we had just before, was honey processed, where they, instead of fermenting it to get the mucilage off, they dry it in the mucilage. It has a bit of risk because it can mold, but often they use it in countries with poor water and stuff like that, because you don't actually need a lot of water to produce it, so it helps them to be able to get a bit more for the crop. Any question? That was such a quick overview. Like, I could do like 6 weeks on that. But coffee's like this thing. I've got it written down. Coffee's wonderful but frustrating. So like, what happens with coffee is that there's all these different countries producing sometimes the same thing that's called something different. Sometimes a different thing called the same thing. And so you've got to figure out where it's coming from to figure out what they're actually meaning, and then you need to interpret it into what you're doing. And I find with coffee as well, with roasting and with baristering, is that nothing's perfect. It's like you're choosing the best out of not the best choices in order to achieve something. So like, as an example, if you see Mitch playing around with your coffee earlier, in order to make your Costa Rica, he's distributing it and he's using a WCS thing, we can't do that with every single coffee because it just takes so long. It makes it better, but it just takes so long. And the person getting a caramel latte in the morning is just like, I gotta go, So like, we're just choosing speed in one sense. So it's one of those things where you'll always have to sacrifice something to achieve something in coffee. And I find that true for baristering, through roasting, through green selection, through processing. There's always seems to be this compromise. Roasters, right? There's all these different types of roasters. We can kind of put them into 2 separate categories. More, but for simplicity's sake, we'll put them into 2. We've got drum roasters and we've got air roasters. This would be considered an air roaster. It's got air circulating the beans around, it's moving it, where a drum roaster is, just pretend this is a drum, this thing rotates and gets hot, basically. Think air fryer versus a frying pan.
Is
it's so simplistic it doesn't work, but we'll just run with that for now. Going to be a little bit different. When we roast our coffee, there's a whole bunch of things happen. I've got like this whole document I wrote on like the chemical processes that happen during roasting. Mainly, to dumb it down, we're caramelizing the sugars. Yeah, and we're trying to caramelize it in the right amount. If you do it too little, it's not going to be enough. If you do it too much, it's going to taste either like hay or like teriyaki beef. Bad enough as it is, when I'm doing it, I'm trying to really think about how I'm caramelizing it and making sure that it's gonna caramelize all the way through. Yeah, because when we look at coffee, we want to make sure it's roasted all the way through. So when we crack them open, if you can have a look kind of on these things, we want to make sure that you can't have coffee beans like steak. Medium rare with coffee is just not going to work. It has to be cooked all the way through, and you'll find when we cup this coffee later, this is underdeveloped. It's going to have a real sourness and a hay coming through where it hasn't been caramelized enough. And then we're going to go to this end. There's not a lot of the coffee that you can actually taste anymore. Some people like it quite dark. The reason that we roast coffee light is because I want to make it drinkable. You can't drink green coffee. Like it's just, you can't grind it, you can't extract it well, it just doesn't work. It has to be roasted. All of those chemical reactions need to take place in order for it to be drinkable and be palatable. We roast it lighter because, as you can see on the wall, we've got coffee farmers. We want to show you what the farmers have done to their coffee, right? And so, like this, it's the seed of a fruit. If you roast it correctly and we extract it correctly, you can taste what the fruit used to taste like. Which is, these farmers may have been on their farm for generations. I've had it for an hour and I've been playing around with it. You know what I mean? Like, I want to show you what they're doing to it. Where if we roast here, you can't really taste what it used to taste like. All you can taste is what the roaster has done to it. Move away from like a darker roast, we find like you can't go back to it. Like it was something in the beginning, and a lot of the time I think a dark roast needs to be fixed through something sweet. And so you'll often find the chains that run dark roast will often sell you a syrup or something like that in order to fix the bitterness and to fix the things where we can actually roast it properly and put it in. You don't need the sugar to fix the bitterness. It's going to come through really nice and sweet. So that'll also come through our bean selection. Yeah, so when we roast it, it's going to increase in size. So technically this coffee is going to it's going to be bigger than this coffee. This coffee is going to be lighter in terms of how much it weighs than this coffee. There's a lot more moisture still left in this end, where there's a lot less moisture left in this end. First crack is something we're going to talk about. So you'll hear it. We're only roasting 90 grams on this. It's going to happen really quickly and early, and it's not all going to happen at the same time, which is, it's a mix of all the beans aren't getting to the same temperature at the right time because we're using something that's not designed for roasting. But like in the machine, when we have first crack, there's a couple of cracks that'll happen earlier, but then usually you'll hear this dut, 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 and it's like this crescendo starts. That's where we mark first crack, and we actually use that time reading in order to determine when we'll stop the roast. Actually, super interestingly, I'd never seen it before because I'd never roasted this dark on a popcorn popper. But you see those little black things everywhere? Yeah. It was throwing parts of the bean out. So the second crack was so violent, it was separating small amounts of it, and it was like coming out everywhere, and I was like, got this vacuum, and I'm trying to like, anyway. The heat application, usually when we roast, so the older school style of roasting was, they'd kind of, when I got taught, we used a soaking method of heat. We would bring the roaster up to charge temperature, it was about 200 and something degrees, and then we would drop the coffee in. The heat was still on quite low. The coffee would plummet because it's a room temperature, coffee entering a hot environment, it'll plummet. It gets to a point called the turning point, which the roaster's now taken over and it's able to start increasing in temperature. And then it would go up. Usually then you would apply the heat and you would keep on going. That's how I roasted for quite a number of years. We don't actually do that much anymore. The way I think about roasting now is that in its less roasted state, it's less susceptible to roasting defects that can occur by too much heat. So when I roast, I often apply a lot of heat early and then reduce the heat as I go in order to penetrate the heat into the thing because we want it to be penetrated all the way in. We don't want it medium rare. And then I lower it towards the end to make sure caramelization occurs, as well as if there's too much heat later, it'll start to scorch and there's roasting defects that can come from that kind of thing. So we maintain a higher acidity in there. Often it'll pair well with different things. Like as an example, we had a Kenyan coffee a few years ago, had a really prominent apple flavor. We actually extracted it and roasted it in a way to increase the acidity because it paired really well with the apple flavor. Or like with our house blend, we actually tried to lower the acidity a lot more because it's going to go into milk, and sometimes it can come through a bit sour if it's through milk. Yeah. Temperature, which is the top. So this is called S-curve roasting, right? Which it's also not true because if it wasn't S, it would actually be horrendous because it would drop in temperature. But like we've got the charge, temperature, which is what we're going to heat the drum to before we drop the coffee in. It's going to plummet to turning point. And so these are all the points that we'll mark when we do our roast later, which is not going to really work. But when we do it in this, we will always mark those times, as well as first crack, it's an audible sound, and then our end time and temperature. A dude called Scott Rao developed some golden rules around roasting. We actually break a bunch of them, but because it's a little bit old school, but it's a fantastic guide. So he developed I think he developed, but he published it anyway, so he might have. The time between first crack and the end of the roast, his method is between 20 and 25 of the entire roast period. So when roasters talk about development, they're not actually talking about the development all the way through. They're talking about the time from first crack to the end of the roast. It's all about development time. Usually it's in a percentage. As an example, our crowd pleaser blend is at 19%, so we kind of break it a little bit anyway, roast a little bit lighter. And then we have a CP plus, which is for our wholesale accounts, which is a little bit darker, and that's 21-ish kind of percent. Where for an industry standard, it's very light. I couldn't replicate that exactly in the air roaster, but we can kind of have a bit of a go because I couldn't actually determine what first crack was. So if we listen to it and you figure it out, and you can put your hand up or mark a time down because we'll time it and everything. We want to figure out what our rate of rise is. So how many degrees per minute it's increasing in temperature. What his method was from the turning point, it plummets. So from that point, the temperature has to continually be increasing. It can't drop. But the rate that it's increasing needs to be continually decreasing. So our rate of rise may start at 16 degrees per minute, which is why I've got the burner on 100%, it's going for it. And then the next one 15, the next one 14 degrees per minute. It's dropping, but it's still increasing in temperature, but the rate is decreasing. To the point where I've often have like a roast where it's gone through each minute, I've recorded it, and then we've gotten to the end and I've pulled it out and it's gone at like 1 degree per minute. And we're like, we did it. Okay, I need a volunteer. Yes. You. Okay, this is a thermometer. So you are going to be putting it in here while it's roasting. Every 30 seconds, we are going to record what the temperature is. It's going to be so hard to do because it's this thing, but just find a spot to aim at. There's going to be beans in there, obviously, and just try and aim at the same spot every time.
Okay.
Right?
Good luck, yeah.
Also, you're going to have to move it out of the way because it's going to be hot air and chaff flowing everywhere. Yeah. So the bench is going to be covered in crap, but it'll be fun. I will also can we turn on our coffee roaster extraction? Yeah, it's on. All right, so this should be our smoke chimney, which is kind of working. So generally, if we're roasting on a big roaster, it's currently whatever the degrees are inside, 20 something. Where the heat up of a roaster is quite important. It's going to be half an hour to heat up. The first two roasts are actually not going to be exactly right. So we'll lower how much we put in for the first two roasts to account for the lack of thermal stability. Then from the third roast, especially on these roasters with big cast iron, we can just get it within seconds of each other, even after 20 roasts at the end of the day. A lot of it is based on the machine, but then how we put coffee in and take it out, it's how we change over our coffee is also really important. So it's all timed to a schedule. So as an example, say we're roasting our crowd pleaser blend, which is popping out at 210 at the moment. Crowd pleaser end temperature? 210. So we're roasting our crowd pleaser, it gets to 210 degrees, we pull it out. It'll drop then temperature, it's open, 190 degrees. The door will shut, it'll go up to 200 degrees. She'll turn the burners on 100%. 205, it'll go back in. So that's like a dance you get to do every time you stop the roaster out, and it's all very much within a certain time. Because what we're doing, right, we do coffees like this, which is super fun. We don't sell hundreds of kilos of this coffee. Like, we love to drink it because it's exciting. But our blend, which gets put in milk, which is the one on this side, is the hundreds of kilos of coffee a week that everyone's going to do, right? So consistency is incredibly important. We need it to be the same every time. It's a 5 kilo roaster. We will mix 3 batches together in order to, if there's any discrepancy between the batches, it's going to be hopefully evened out between the 3 batches, which gets roasted together. So it's all consistency based stuff, because we're trying to replicate the same thing over and over again. Normally, I'd heat it up to 200 degrees. It's an air roaster. This would happen in a couple of seconds if I did that. But what we're going to do to start with, here it is, 90 grams, putting 90 grams in. And then we're going to turn it on. I've got a timer. Has everyone got the pens ready? So I think, actually, let me check my notes. I think I'm going to pull it out at 8 minutes. It's going to be gross. Mai's going to then 8 minutes. She's like, really? Again? Then what's going to happen is Mai's going to unplug it and go and throw it into the roasting tray to cool down, otherwise we'll set fire. No worries. Don't set fire or burn yourself. I did set fire to one today, but it was an old one. It should be fine. Are you ready?
We'll see how often?
Every 30 seconds. Okay. In our big roaster, we're going to start off with 16 degrees per minute. By the end, we're looking at about 5 degrees per minute. This jumps 60 degrees in 30 seconds. So that's quick. What's it now? 134.2. So that's not. I don't think that's first crack, but it's such a small sample size. It could be. So this is where we're starting to have oil seep to the outside. It's probably already happened. If it was on a traditional roaster, this would be 15, 16. On our roaster, this would probably be like 16, 17 minutes in. Oil's seeping to the outside. It's starting to kind of burn, and it's coating the beans. I'm going to attempt to cool it in this, which is probably going to be a bad choice, but we'll see. We'll see how we go. All right, we're at 8 minutes, and the time is, sorry, temperature?
Oh, it said 169, which...
154. All right. Actually, it's not as dark as what I thought it was going to be. I think... Oh, you just blew it everywhere. All right. So really, when we're doing this commercially, the cooling down of the coffee is important. So this whole tray in the bottom of our roaster is just a cooling tray. It just sucks air through, as well as it's still kind of producing smoke. Maybe? Maybe not now. It's still got a lot of heat in it. So on the smaller roasters, we can just use air to cool it. Okay. So on like larger commercial roastering, you can't cool coffee down quick enough with air on these giant roasters. They have evaporative cooling where it sprays with a bit of water. As soon as the water hits the bean, it turns into steam, and it tries to cool it down as quick as possible. It's really effective at cooling it. It ages the coffee like crazy. So like it will simulate a week of aging through evaporative cooling. Beautiful. All right. It's still hot, but feel free to pass it around and have a look at it. So we're trying to get it under 40 degrees in under 4 minutes. Commercially, this isn't going to be, but you can still feel the heat that's retained in it. Like it's been out for a bit. It's still warm and hot. Put that on top of there. Oh, that's a good idea. Do you want to start preparing the cupping? Oh look, he's just made it's a cooling tray. Home job. We're all about home jobs. Welcome to First Fruits Coffee roasting courses. My name is Dan Smith and I'll be your trainer. now we're at 210 degrees.